Our first reading from the Word today is from Ecclesiasticus 38, verses 27 through 32. So it is with every artisan and master artisan who labor by night as well as by day. Those who cut the signets of seals, each is diligent in making a great variety. They set their heart on painting a lifelike image, and they are careful to finish their work. So it is with the smith, sitting by the anvil, intent on his ironwork. The breath of the fire melts his flesh, and he struggles with the heat of the furnace. The sound of the hammer deafens his ears, and his eyes are on the pattern of the object. He sets his heart on finishing his handiwork, and he is careful to complete its decoration. So it is with the potter, sitting at his work and turning the wheel with his feet. He is always deeply concerned over the products and produces them in quantity. He molds the clay with his arm and makes it pliable with his feet. He sets his heart on finishing the glazing and takes care in firing the kiln. All of these rely on their hands, and all are skillful in their own work. Without them, no city can be inhabited, and wherever they live, they will not go hungry.
From Matthew 20, verses 1 to 16, the parable of the workers in the vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, he did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being fair to you, my friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who worked. Did I want to give the work who was hired the last the same as I gave you? Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last."
And from Conjugal Love 183. Then some of that conjugal assembly said to the angels, "We have heard that the origin of conjugal love is divine celestial, because it is from the influx from the Lord into the souls of men, and that because from the Lord it is love, wisdom, and use, which are the 3 essentials that together make the one divine essence. and that nothing but what is of the divine essence can proceed from him and flow into the inmost of man, which is called his soul, and that in their descent into the body, these three are changed into what is analogous and correspondent. Now, therefore, we ask, first, what is meant by the third essential proceeding divine, which is called use? The angels replied, love and wisdom without use are but ideas of abstract thought, which also after some tarrying pass away as the winds. But in use, the two are brought together and there make a one which is called real. Love cannot rest until it is doing, for love is the active itself of life. Nor can wisdom exist and subsist except from love and with it while it is doing, and doing is use. We therefore define use to be doing good from love by wisdom. Use is the good itself.
Okay, well, beloved, we got this thing every year rolling around at the cusp of the end of summer, where we have a holiday that we call Labor Day, and we honor labor by resting, an appropriate, if ironic, gesture. Labor Day is indeed the most Sabbath-like of our national holidays, designated, even if secularly, as a day of rest. And that is the lesser reason why Labor Day weekend can evoke genuine spiritual significance. The greater reason is because there are very few themes in our practical living that impact our souls so profoundly over time as our labor. In the investment of our time and energy, as well as in the formation of our self-identity, work fairly well tops off the list for a great many of us. Another way to come at the same thing is to examine realistically this world that God has plunked us down into. It's hard down here. If there's any abiding purpose undergirding the natural life conditions in this world, then the Lord must have some huge central spiritual lesson for us in work. Because the most obvious immediate reality factor resulting from God's placement of our tender spirits into this rather fiercely rugged physical plane is that we must work both hard and with consistency, else we perish. So, just by the facts of our existence, work is at hand. And if we are sensitive, we do discover a partnership that's pretty intriguing and exciting with God in this business of running the world. There's a story about the Roman Emperor Judea, Tineius Rufus of Judea, who once asked a rabbi, it's a Roman emperor asking a rabbi, well, whose works are more beautiful, God's or the works of humans? And the rabbi answered, well, the works of humans, of course. Surprised by the rabbi's reply, the governor asked, can you yourself make heaven and earth? To which the rabbi responded, let's not discuss things that are out of our ken, but let's see how God can work through the human. The rabbi then sent for ears of corn, bundles of cotton, and a bucket of muddy clay. Alongside that, he laid down loaves of freshly baked bread, a finely stitched tunic, and an exquisite pottery vase. Then he pointed to the corn, the cotton, and the clay and said, these are the works of God. And then he pointed to the bread and the tunic and the vase and said, and these are the work of humans. Are they not more beautiful than the work of God? So God has placed us in a partnership, right? A partnership in this very unfinished world, which coincides very nicely with the little matter of our own unfinished conditions as spiritual beings. You know, a lot of people do not feel that working is at all instrumental in their spiritual development. Huge masses, I would say, have not really gotten the picture and see work only as an unpleasant means to leisure and, you know, experiencing the really good things in life. In ancient Greece, the Athenian citizen did not work. That was the business of slaves and manual workers, and was considered a degrading affair. The noble life was that of an aesthetic philosopher, in which the ideal life is entirely organized around enjoying the finer things of life. This aristocratic class of leisure had been in place for centuries throughout Europe, and it still persists up to the present day. Yet the principles of spiritual development in our faith do not seem to support looking at life that way, at least if living upon higher spiritual planes is the goal. Swedenborg writes in Heaven and Hell that to receive the life of heaven, a person must live in the world and engage in its businesses and its employments, and by means of a moral and a civil life there, through these struggles of rough conditions, finally receive a more refined spiritual life. In no other way can we be prepared for heaven except coming through this world. You know, use has been a pretty big concept in Swedenborgianism. It's in some ways a distinctive touch around our discourse about spirituality that's almost like shaker furniture. Usefulness, of course, would be respected everywhere. Everybody knows what's meant by that. But there's a way in which it has evolved as kind of a centerpiece of our spirituality, and more has been written about it. Use in the church's understanding means essentially spiritual functioning. Suppose we wanted to really grasp the uses of a dentist. It would not be enough to talk of drills and medications and x-rays. We would need to intuitively experience what it is to have healthy teeth for chewing first. And for speaking, what's the use of teeth for speaking? And to have a concrete feeling of the goodness that comes from that reality. Without the goodness involved through a use, there is no real purpose involved through the work. Our whole being is, in our dentistry example, is really dependent on having good teeth, so that there's a true use that the dentist gives to people that profoundly improves the act of living. This spiritual method of usefulness has an immensely concrete aspect to it. When we are functioning at a high spiritual capacity, that's when we have trained ourselves to be highly attuned to the goodness that comes through that use. The more we are attuned to the goodness that will come through the work that we are doing, the more powerfully our emotions are engaged for the purposefulness and the connection to a larger state of being that drives us to do the hard work, to experience concretely the way in which we are participating with God in creating goodness itself. That's the spirituality of knowing how to be useful in little things and in very big things. So this means that the love of use becomes a guiding force in the training of our labors. And even though usefulness was discussed in Swedenborg before Wilson Van Dusen, it had never really been lifted out as one of the significant themes in Swedenborgian thought. So maybe everyone here knows who Wilson Van Dusen was. Maybe a couple of you may go, well, I don't know, I've heard the name, I don't know. Van has been gone for 20 years now, into the next life, but he's the one who wrote the best-selling small work in Swedenborgian spirituality of the 20th century by far. It was simply called Uses, and then it became, in later editions, it's been republished 5 times, Usefulness. And it's a funny story about Van that maybe is kind of worth telling. You know, he grew up in a very, but it connects with usefulness and his ability to see the power of usefulness in a way that had not really quite been elaborated profoundly in the same way. The way his small work on usefulness just connected with thousands of people, became his best known work, and it became the most widely published small work out of Swedenborgiana, the 20th century, as I said. But, you know, he grew up in this atheist household in San Francisco, but he had this spiritualist grandmother. And when he was little, um, less than 10, um, they had a connection. You know how that sometimes is. There was a grandparent that he really was connected to, and that was this particular spiritualist grandmother. She kept this set of red books on her mantle above the fireplace that was kind of about like this. They were kind of small red books, and there was a bunch of them. In truth, we know that there are 20 or 12. And she pointed to them one day when she was getting a little ill, and she says, I am giving these books to you. Everything you will ever need to know in your life are in these books. And she passed on fairly soon after that. Van Dusen's parents did not think these books were an appropriate thing for their son to have, and they got rid of them. And so he did not receive those books. And he was a little crestfallen, and, you know, he was upset about it. But, you know, he was still little. Life goes on. Life goes on. He ends up going to college, having a degree in psychology at Cal Berkeley, goes off to Canada at the University of Ottawa to do a PhD in psychology, becomes a very significant psychologist in the human potential movement, and wrote probably and was had a very successful career. So he was walking around San Francisco now as this, you know, kind of professional person going into a used bookstore, and he sees these books. He sees the very books that was on his grandmother's mantle, and he buys them. Well, those books are called the Swedenborg Reader. They're excerpts, just like we read today out of Swedenborg. It was by Benjamin Fisk Barrett, late 19th century, who was kind of a really excellent communicator of Swedenborgiana. And he shaped these books that are all excerpts from Swedenborg on topics. And Van Dusen was engrossed by the wisdom that he found in these books. And then he found another little book that's almost entirely unknown in Swedenborgiana by this same guy, Benjamin Fisk Barrett. And it was a little book. If you go into a Swedenborgian library, they'll be cataloged right next to his Swedenborg Reader library because it's the same author, right? And it's this little skinny thing called Ends and Uses. And Van Dusen said, Van Dusen read that and was blown away by it. And he said, this doctrine of use is so powerful and important, and it has been unrecognized for its power. So use in the spirit, he writes uses, and it is mushroomed in the last half century in the language we use around Swedenborgiana. The spiritual method of usefulness is connected to goodness. And when we're functioning at a high spiritual capacity, it's when we've trained ourselves to be very attuned to this goodness that we can be a part of with God in producing, that there's a goodness and a beauty and a power and an overwhelming sense of being connected with something higher and rich when we are able to be useful. It's the usefulness of the activities that connects us to the life-giving love of God. So this means that the love of uses becomes a guiding force in our labors. Love joins with wisdom to move toward effective use. And we get better and better, whether it's raising children, working in a garden, clerking in a store, making widgets of some kind, whatever. We become very good at something. And that through that experience and a love of being effective in our labors that produces these goods and uses become very basic in our sense of being, in our sense of being connected to the larger body of humanity. So a beautiful thing begins to happen. We become active in some use repeatedly. We begin to live in that use with others and receive its goodness. And we come into this profound relationship with who they are and what their needs are. So what's the use? Turns out to be a question that really helps us in our pilgrimage of life. What is the use? Becoming conscious and aware of the deeper reaches of true usefulness makes what's the use a spiritual mantra, good for any situation. What's the use here? The deeper we see the true answer, the more our understanding is opened into myriad mysteries that are all around us. The stronger our love for the goodness of our uses, the more at home we are in God's creation. And may that be true forever and ever. And amen.